Ever been in a social situation where you just feel stuck, like you're going through the motions, but um, nothing real is happening?
Oh, yeah. Or maybe you walk away from a conversation and think that felt a little off, but you can't quite put your finger on why.
Exactly that feeling, like there's some kind of hidden dynamic playing out.
Mm-hmm. It's like there's an unspoken script influencing how we interact. Super common feeling, I think.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're actually going to try and crack open that hidden script.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, we're diving deep into the work of psychiatrist Eric Berne and his, well, really groundbreaking book, Games People Play.
Ah, Berne. Yeah, he really offered a completely new way to look at our relationships, didn't he?
Totally. And look, this isn't about like complex therapy sessions or anything. It's more about getting some powerful insights into why we relate the way we do, why some interactions just work and others don't.
Right. He showed us that our interactions often aren't random at all. They tend to follow these predictable patterns, sometimes with hidden intentions kind of driving them.
Predictable patterns, yeah. And his framework helps us understand those patterns, those recurring themes in just our everyday lives.
It really does.
So, we've taken some key bits from Burns' work, and our mission today really is to give you, our listener, a new lens to see these interactions through.
A new lens. I like that.
Yeah, we want to help you understand why some conversations leave you feeling drained, or maybe even subtly manipulated, and how you can navigate them with a clearer head about what's really going on.
So people can expect some potential aha moments, maybe.
I think so. We're trying to unlock a bit of the hidden code of social interaction here.
Okay, so where are we starting? What are the core ideas we're hitting?
We'll look at the basic human need for connection first. Really fundamental stuff.
Okay, the drive to interact.
And how we structure our time together. After that, we'll get into the different ego states Bernay talked about, which influence how we act.
Parent, adult, child.
Right, exactly. And finally, we'll delve into that really intriguing concept of games, those unconscious patterns we play out with each other.
The games people play. Literally. Okay, let's do it.
So let's jump right in with that really fundamental thing, our deep-seated need to connect. Where does that come from?
Well, Bernay, and he drew on the work of Renee Spitz here, identified this core human drive he called stimulus hunger.
Stimulus hunger, okay.
Yeah. Spitz's research, which was quite tragic actually, involved infants and showed what happens when that need for physical contact for stimulus isn't met. The effects were devastating.
Right, I remember reading about that. It highlights that our need for, like, sensory input and interaction is just as basic as needing food, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's primal. And Bernay argued that as we grew older, this need for physical closeness kind of morphs. It evolves into what he called recognition hunger.
Recognition hunger. So
Yeah.
wanting to be seen, basically.
Precisely. And he used the word strokes, which is a key term to describe any act that signifies recognition of another person. Any act at all.
Okay, stroke. So that starts physical, like a hug or a pat on the back.
Yeah, initially it's physical intimacy, but then it evolves into more symbolic forms. A nod, a smile, a comment, asking a question,
Even a critical remark.
even a critical remark, yeah, because they all essentially say, I acknowledge you exist, I see you.
Wow.
And what's fascinating and maybe a bit counterintuitive is that even a negative interaction provides a stroke. It still fulfills that basic need for recognition.
So negative attention is better than no attention at all.
From this perspective, yes, it really drives home how fundamental that need is. Being ignored, being invisible, is often psychologically harder than receiving, say, criticism.
That makes a strange kind of sense.
Berne argued that any social interaction, positive or negative, has a kind of biological advantage over no interaction. He even mentioned some experiments with rats.
With rats.
Yeah, where apparently things like gentle handling and even painful electric shocks had similarly positive effects on their overall health and survival compared to rats left totally alone.
That's wild. It really underscores that need for
Yeah.
something, some form of connection.
Exactly. And these exchanges of strokes, these moments of mutual recognition back and forth, that's what Berne called transactions, the basic unit of social intercourse.
Transactions. Okay, got it. So we're constantly seeking these strokes, and our interactions are just strings of transactions. But it's not just about getting strokes, is it? We also need to do something with our time.
Right. That brings us to the next concept, structure hunger.
Structure hunger.
Yeah. Once our need for stimulus and recognition is met, at least to some degree, we then face the problem of Well, what do we do now? How do we fill our waking hours?
Avoiding boredom, basically.
Avoiding boredom, avoiding unstructured time. Think about those awkward silences when you're with people you don't know well, that discomfort. That's often structure hunger kicking in. We need ways to organize our time together.
So social life is partly just a collective effort to structure time.
In many ways, yes. And Bernie called the ways we do this programming.
Programming, like computer programming.
Sort of. He meant it in terms of how we schedule or fill time. He talked about material programming like work or tasks, social programming, the routines and rituals of interaction, and individual programming like hobbies or solitary activities.
Okay. And within that social programming, he specifically highlighted something called pastimes. What are those exactly?
Pastimes are those familiar, often semi-ritualistic social interchanges,
Yeah.
things we do to pass the time sociably. They're largely driven by, social norms, what's considered polite or acceptable conversation in a given group, good manners, essentially.
So like chit-chat, small talk.
Pretty much the kind of conversations you have at a party where you don't know people well or waiting in line. Burness was clearly a keen observer of this stuff. He saw these seemingly trivial exchanges as important ways we connect and, interestingly, size each other up.
Sizing each other up. How so?
We'll get to that. But first, think about typical pastimes. Talking about the weather, sports, current events.
Yeah, or what you watched last night.
Exactly. Byrne actually gave some quite funny colloquial names to common ones. Things like man talk, cars, sports, work, or lady talk, maybe kids, clothes, relationships, though these are obviously stereotypes, Byrne observed.
Okay. Yeah.
And then variations of small talk, like how to, giving instructions, how much talking prices ever been, comparing travel, do you know, exchanging gossip or contacts, what became, catching up on old acquaintances, morning after, discussing last night's party, martini, a specific kind of cocktail party chat.
Martini. He really cataloged them.
He did, and he pointed out they provide a comfortable, predictable way to exchange strokes and structure time. But he also said they operate on different levels.
Different levels? What do you mean? Like depending on who's talking?
Yes, and how they're talking. He classified them structurally based on the ego states involved and psychologically.
Ah, the ego states again. Parent, adult, child.
Right. So take a typical PTA meeting, pastime parents talking. If they're discussing fundraising logistics, that might be mostly adult exchange. Practical, factual. But if the conversation shifts to, say, complaining about kids these days or how the school should be run, that might slip into a parent transaction, maybe judgmental or prescriptive.
I can picture that.
And he also talked about projective pastimes talking about other people, like they never, or introjective ones talking about ourselves, like I always seem to.
So these pastimes, this small talk,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just killing time, it serves a deeper purpose.
Absolutely. This is where the sizing up comes in. Bernard argued that pastimes act as a kind of social selection process. While our adult ego state is engaged in the surface chat, our child ego state, the more intuitive feeling part, is subconsciously checking out the other people.
Checking them out. For what?
For their potential suitability for more complex relationships, for games.
Ah, okay, so the light, maybe superficial chat is actually a testing ground. We're sort of auditioning people.
In a way, yes. Unconsciously, we're seeing who feels comfortable, who responds in ways that resonate with our own patterns, who might be a good partner for the kinds of psychological exchanges, the games we tend to engage in.
That's a bit unsettling, but interesting.
It is. And pastimes also serve another function. They help confirm our roles and stabilize our position.
Position. What does he mean by position?
A position is like a fundamental stance or belief we hold about ourselves and others, often adopted early in life. Simple statements like, I'm okay, you're okay, or I'm okay, you're not okay, or vice versa. These positions influence how we interact and, Berne believed, even shape our life's script or destiny.
Okay, like a core belief.
Exactly. And pastimes reinforce these. Someone whose position is, I'm helpless, might constantly engage in pastimes where they seek advice they never take. Someone whose position is people can't be trusted might focus on pastimes that involve gossip or criticism. It confirms their view of the world.
Right. It's like finding evidence for what you already believe. Kind of like Jung's idea of the persona, maybe, but more tied to these basic life beliefs.
There are parallels, yes. It's about the role we present and how interactions reinforce that role and the underlying position. So in that PTA pastime, someone might always play the anxious parent, reinforcing their position that the world is dangerous and I must worry.
Got it. So we need connection, stimulus recognition, hunger, We fill time,
Yeah.
structure hunger, with interactions, transactions, including these semi-ritualistic chats, pastimes, which also help us sort people and confirm our beliefs, positions.
Mm.
Now, to really understand the how of these interactions, we need those ego states you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Parent, adult, and child. This is central to transactional analysis, or TA.
So remind us, what are they? Are they like different personalities?
Not quite different personalities, more like distinct states of being, distinct patterns of feeling, thinking, and behaving that exist within each of us. Berne got some inspiration from neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield's work.
Penfield. What did he find?
Penfield found that stimulating specific parts of the brain during surgery could cause patients to re-experience past events with the original feelings intact. This suggested to Berne that our past experiences, feelings, attitudes, especially from childhood and from observing our parents, are recorded in the brain and can be replayed, reactivated as these distinct ego states.
So they're like recordings we can switch between.
That's a decent analogy. Let's break them down. The parent ego state.
Okay, the parent. That's like the collection of rules and behaviors we absorb from our parents and other authority figures, right?
Exactly. It contains all those shoulds, shouldn'ts, nurturing messages, critical messages, prejudices, and attitudes we picked up. It has two main aspects: the nurturing parent, caring, protective, and the critical parent, controlling, judgmental.
And it helps us parent our own kids.
It enables effective parenting, yes, but it also makes many of our responses automatic. That feeling of, that's just the way it's done, or that internal critical voice that's often the parent ego state operating.
Makes sense. We all have those voices in our heads. Okay, what about the adult?
The adult ego state is our rational, logical, data processing self. It functions like a computer, takes in information from the outside world and from the parent and child states, analyzes it, calculates probabilities, and makes objective decisions based on the here and now reality.
So it's the unemotional thinking part.
Ideally, yes. It's about objective appraisal. Think about crossing a busy street. You assess the traffic speed, the distance, your walking speed. That's your adult functioning. Or figuring out a complex problem at work. The adult acts as a sort of mediator between the demands of the parent and the impulses of the child.
The mediator. Okay, and that leaves the child ego state.
The child ego state contains all the feelings, impulses, and experiences from our own childhood. It's the source of our intuition, creativity, spontaneity, joy, but also our fears, tears, and tantrums.
So all the raw feelings and reactions.
Pretty much. It also has different aspects. The natural child, spontaneous, expressive. The adapted child, modifying behavior to please or get by with parent figures. And the little professor, intuitive, curious, manipulative sometimes.
Wow. Okay. Parent, adult, child. And we all have all three.
Yes, absolutely. And Berne stressed that all three are valuable and necessary for a full life. We need the parent for rules and nurturing, the adult for dealing with reality, and the child for joy, creativity, and intimacy. Problems usually arise when they're out of balance, or when one state inappropriately takes over in a situation where another would be more effective.
Right, like yelling like a child in a business meeting.
Exactly. Or being overly critical like a parent when someone just needs some adult problem solving.
Okay, so we have these ego states. How do they actually interact? That brings us back to transactions, doesn't it?
Yes. Remember, a transaction is the basic unit. A stimulus from one person's ego state and a response from another person's ego state. Simple transactional analysis is basically diagnosing which ego state sent the stimulus and which sent the response.
And you mentioned before there are complementary and cross transactions. Let's unpack that. What's a complementary one?
A complementary transaction is smooth sailing. The response comes from the ego state the stimulus was aimed at, and the response is directed back to the ego state that sent the stimulus. The communication vectors are parallel.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. Adult to adult stimulus. What time is the meeting? Adult to adult response. It's at 3 p.m. Simple, direct communication continues.
Makes sense.
Or maybe a child to parent stimulus. Ouch. I cut my finger. Parent to child response. Oh dear, let me put a bandage on that for you. Again, the response is appropriate and expected for the stimulus.
So as long as transactions are complementary, the conversation just flows.
Generally, yes. Communication can proceed smoothly, sometimes indefinitely, as long as the transactions remain complementary. It feels natural, in sync.
But life isn't always smooth sailing. So what's a crossed transaction?
That's where the wires get crossed. The response comes from an ego state different from the one the stimulus was targeting. The communication vectors intersect, and bang, communication breaks down.
Breakdown. Okay, example.
Classic example Berne used. Stimulus, maybe from a therapist, adult to adult. Perhaps we should try to understand why you've been drinking more lately.
Okay, logical question.
An expected adult response might be, yes, I've been wondering about that too. But a cross response, maybe from the child state back to the therapist perceived as a parent, could be, you're always criticizing me just like my father used to.
Whoa. Okay, yeah, that definitely stops the original conversation.
Completely. The lines are crossed. The original topic, the drinking, is derailed, and now you have to deal with this sudden child-parent dynamic that's erupted. You have to somehow realign the vectors before you can get back to the issue.
So cross-transactions cause communication problems, misunderstandings, arguments maybe?
Often, yes. Berne also described another type, type 2, which is common in everyday life too. Imagine an adult stimulus. Do you know where my cufflinks are?
Simple question.
But it gets a crossed parent-to-child response. Why don't you keep track of your own things? You're not a child anymore.
Ouch. Yeah, I can see how that happens.
So, complementary keeps things going, cross stops things. Now there's one more layer here, ulterior transactions.
Ulterior? Okay, these sound sneaky. Hidden messages.
Exactly. Ulterior transactions involve more than two ego states operating simultaneously. There's an overt social level message and a covert psychological level message. This is where things get really interesting because this is the basis for games.
Ah, okay. The hidden stuff is key for games.
Right. Brunn talked about angular ulterior transactions involving three ego states. Think of a classic salesman tactic. The salesman's adult might say to the customer's adult, this model is better, but you probably can't afford it.
Okay, factual statement, but with a hook.
Exactly. The overt message is adult-adult, but the hidden psychological message is from the salesman's manipulative adult or parent to the customer's child, basically saying, I dare you, or prove you're worthy.
And customer's child might bite.
And the customer's child might respond, I'll take it, overriding their own adult assessment of affordability. That's angular.
Okay, I see that. And the other type?
Duplex ulterior transactions involve four ego states, two in each person, operating at the same time. Flirtation is a classic example.
Flirting. How does that work?
Well, on the social level, one person's adult might say to the other's adult, come up and see my etchings, or, let me show you the barn.
Okay, seemingly innocent invitation.
But on the psychological level, their child might be sending a message to the other person's child, like, let's play. And the other person's adult might respond socially, oh, I've always been interested in barns, while their child is sending back a psychological message, like, okay, game on.
Right, the double meaning. Socially acceptable, but with a whole other conversation happening underneath.
Exactly. And it's these duplex ulterior transactions, these hidden psychological messages driving the interaction, that form the structure of what Berne called games.
Okay, finally. Games. So they're not fun activities.
Generally, no. In transactional analysis, a game isn't about playfulness. It's a recurring sequence of these complementary ulterior transactions, moving towards a well-defined predictable outcome or payoff.
A payoff, like winning something.
More like collecting a familiar, often negative psychological feeling, like resentment or self-pity or righteousness or guilt. It's an unconscious strategy to get strokes, structure time, maintain a position, or avoid true intimacy, even if the payoff feels bad.
Wow. So we play these patterns to get a familiar bad feeling. That sounds messed up.
It can seem that way, but remember, these are largely unconscious. They often originate in childhood as ways to cope or get needs met, and they become ingrained habits. The payoff, even if negative, is familial and predictable.
Okay, this needs an example. Berne used if it weren't for you, or IWFY, right? Can you walk us through that one as a model game?
Sure. IWFY is a classic, often seen in marriages or long-term relationships. Berne described a Mrs. White. On the surface, her complaint, often voiced to friends or in therapy, was, if it weren't for my controlling husband, I could do so many things, like I'd love to learn to dance, go out more.
Okay, sounds like a common complaint. The controlling partner holding the other back.
Right, that's the social level. But Berne found that when Mrs. White's husband, perhaps through therapy or just getting fed up, actually stopped being controlling and said, fine, go learn to dance, she suddenly developed reasons why she couldn't. She found she was actually terrified of dancing, of social situations.
Ah, so the husband's controlling behavior, the if it weren't for you, was actually serving a hidden purpose for her.
Exactly. It protected her from confronting her own phobias and anxieties. His restrictions became her excuse. That's the psychological level of the game.
So the payoff for her wasn't actually freedom, but avoiding fear.
That was a big part of it, the internal psychological advantage, as Berne called it. But games usually have multiple advantages, multiple payoffs.
Like what else in IWFY?
Well, the arguments themselves provided intense interaction, a form of negative stroking. That's the biological advantage. The husband might feel guilty and buy her gifts, and the game reinforced her existential position. Maybe something like, all men are tyrants, or I am helpless against external forces.
Okay, so it confirms her worldview, too.
Yes, the existential advantage. And it avoids the feared situation actually going dancing, the external psychological advantage. Plus, it gives her something to talk about with her husband if it weren't for you, the internal social advantage, and something to complain about with her friends if it weren't for him, the external social advantage.
That is layered. So much going on beneath a simple complaint.
Very layered. Berne developed a whole framework for analyzing games based on IWFY. He looked at the thesis, the description of the game, the antithesis, what happens if someone refuses to play or stops the payoff, like the husband becoming permissive in IWFY, leading to Mrs. White's despair or potential insight. The aim, the general goal, like reassurance or vindication, the roles like restricted wife, domineering husband, the dynamics, the underlying psychological forces like phobias in IWFY. He even looked for childhood origins.
And the actual transactions.
Yes, the transactional paradigm identifying the ego states involved on both the social level, often parent-child in IWFY, you can't pour me, and the psychological level, often child-child. Protect me from my fears. Okay, I'll control you. And the moves, the specific sequence of stimulus and response, like instruction compliance, then later instruction protest.
It's like mapping out the whole unconscious choreography.
That's a great way to put it. And understanding this choreography is the first step towards maybe choosing not to dance that particular dance anymore.
Okay, IWFY is a powerful example. Berne identified tons of other games, didn't he? Maybe just touch on a few more so we get a sense of the variety.
Sure. There's alcoholic, which is really complex. It involves multiple roles. The alcoholic themselves, but also the persecutor, criticizing, the rescuer, trying to save them, the patsy, taking the blame, the connections, the supplying the means. The payoff often isn't the drinking itself, but the hangover, the self-flagellation, the drama.
Right, the whole cycle.
Then there's why don't you, yes, but why do you, YB? Someone presents a problem, others offer solutions, why don't you? And the first person shoots every single one down, yes, but.
Oh, I know that one. It's frustrating.
Very. The hidden aim is often for the child ego state to prove that no one, not even authority figures, parents, can tell them what to do or to gain reassurance without actually having to solve the problem. The payoff is often a kind of smug, see, it's impossible. The flip side is I'm only trying to help you, ITH, played by the person giving unwanted advice, payoff being people are so ungrateful.
Huh. Okay, what else?
See what you made me do, says an OIMD. That's the blame game. Someone makes a mistake, often after being interrupted, and blames the interrupter, avoids responsibility, often linked with, you got me into this, UGMIT.
Classic avoidance.
Corner. This game creates that awful feeling of being trapped, a double bind where any move seems wrong. Whatever you do, you lose. Berne linked it potentially to things like asthma or even schizophrenia in extreme forms.
It sounds intense.
Courtroom. People unconsciously set up interactions like a trial, casting themselves or others as plaintiff, defendant, judge, jury. The aim is usually reassurance or vindication by getting a verdict.
Like trying to prove you were right in an argument by appealing to a third party.
Exactly. Aid in awful comes in various forms. Parental complaining nowadays. Adult gossip disguised as information sharing, broken skin, child griping, water cooler talk, or even played seriously by people addicted to surgeries, focusing on medical woes.
Complaining together.
Blemish. The player is hyper-focused on finding tiny flaws in others. It often comes from a depressive child position, no good, transformed into a critical parent one. They're no good. Finding fault in others provides a negative kind of reassurance.
Always finding the negative.
Schlemiel, the clumsy person who spills things, breaks things, makes a mess, then apologizes profusely. Oops, sorry. The key is the second part. The aim is to get forgiveness, to be excused for their destructiveness.
The lovable klutz who isn't always so lovable.
Right. Rapport. This one's more predatory. Berne described it as having a malicious aim, often revenge. One player acts seductive, social level, leads the other on, then claims offense or rejection, psychological payoff. Roles like seductress was.
That sounds quite damaging.
It can be. Peasant. Acting naive or overly impressed. Gee, professor, you're so smart. Often to get special treatment or avoid real work while maintaining an air of innocence. Stupid. Similar to peasant, but more about playing dumb to avoid responsibility or expectations. Different from schlimmel. Focus on forgiveness, or clown, focus on laughs.
It's amazing how many patterns he identified in everyday interactions.
It really is. And he even noted that some apparently positive activities, like working hard, busman's holiday, being chivalrous, cavalier, or helping others, happy to help, they'll be glad they knew me, can become games if the underlying motive isn't genuine, but is instead about seeking a specific psychological payoff, like validation or avoiding intimacy.
So the intention behind the action is crucial.
Absolutely. It's the ulterior transaction and the predictable payoff that define a game.
Okay, so we've seen the hunger for connection, how we structure time, the ego states, the transactions, and now these complex, often unconscious games. What's the point of understanding all this? What's the goal, according to Berne?
The ultimate goal, the grand prize in transactional analysis, is achieving autonomy.
Autonomy, freedom, independence.
Yes, but more specifically, Byrne defined it as the release or recovery of three key human capacities: awareness, spontaneity, and intimacy.
Okay, let's break those down. Awareness, what did he mean by that?
Awareness is the capacity to see, hear, feel, and experience the world directly in the here and now as it really is, without filtering it through the lens of our parents' definitions or our child's fears and scripts from the past.
So being fully present.
Exactly. Living in the present moment, appreciating the sensory world directly. He contrasted the aware person, like someone truly experiencing nature, with someone stuck in their head, maybe worrying about the future, the jerk focused on getting there, or dwelling on the past, the sulk. The aware person is engaged with now.
Like mindfulness, almost.
Very similar concept, yes. Being aware of yourself and your immediate surroundings and experience.
Okay, awareness. What about spontaneity?
Spontaneity is the freedom to choose from the full spectrum of feelings and behaviors available in your parent, adult, and child ego states, and to express them appropriately. It means being liberated from the compulsion to play games and react according to old scripts.
So having options in how you respond rather than automatic reactions.
Precisely. It's about having access to your nurturing parent, your logical adult, your joyful or even angry child, and being able to deploy them by choice, not by programming.
Freedom of feeling and expression. Got it. And the third one, intimacy.
Intimacy for Byrne was the pinnacle. It's that rare moment of spontaneous, game-free, open, candid connection between two people operating from their aware adult and their authentic, uncorrupted, natural child states.
So real connection without the hidden agendas.
Exactly. It's a direct, honest encounter in the here and now. Byrne felt it was often frightening for people because it involves vulnerability and dropping the masks and games we usually hide behind. He even mentioned research suggesting links between clear perception, eidetic imagery, and affection, and between candor and positive feelings. True intimacy is game-free. He distinguished it from one-sided intimacy, sometimes seen in seduction, where one person encourages openness but isn't truly reciprocal.
Wow. Awareness, spontaneity, intimacy. That sounds like a worthy goal, but hard to achieve.
Definitely. Achieving autonomy means challenging deeply ingrained parental messages, societal pressures, and the often subtle but powerful rewards we get from playing familiar games. It's an ongoing process, Byrne suggested, like maintaining a friendly divorce from those dominating internal influences that prevent us from being fully present and authentic.
A friendly divorce.
Yeah.
I like that phrase. This has been, well, incredibly insightful. A lot to think about.
It really is powerful stuff. So just to quickly pull it together, we started with that basic need for strokes, for recognition.
Right. Stimulus hunger, recognition hunger.
Then how we structure time using transactions and those social rituals called pastimes.
Which also help us size people up and confirm our positions.
Exactly. Then we looked inside at the parent, adult, and child ego states influencing our behavior.
And how they interact through complementary, crossed, and those tricky ulterior transactions.
Which led us finally to games, those recurring unconscious patterns with hidden payoffs, illustrated by things like If It Weren't For You.
Yeah. It really does offer a framework, a way to decode some of the confusing or frustrating things that happen in our relationships.
Absolutely. A way to understand the currents flowing beneath the surface.
So for you, our listener, maybe the takeaway here is just to start observing. Pay a bit more attention to your own interactions this week.
Yeah, notice the patterns. See if you can get a sense of which ego states might be active in yourself, in others.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to recognize some of these games playing out. Not in a judgmental way, though.
No, definitely not about judging. It's more about gaining, understanding, seeing the dynamics for what they are. It's about awareness.
Exactly. Awareness. So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to maybe mull over.
Okay.
Now that you have this framework, this lens,
Yeah.
What subtle payoffs, what hidden emotional rewards might you be unknowingly seeking or maybe providing in your own relationships?
Hmm, that's a deep question.
It is. And maybe what might it look like, feel like, to consciously move towards more direct, more game-free, and ultimately more autonomous ways of connecting with the important people in your life?
Powerful things to reflect on.
Definitely. And if this has sparked your interest, we really do recommend checking out Eric Bernays' Games People Play for yourself, or just looking more into transactional analysis. There's a lot more there.
A very rich field. Well, thanks for exploring this with me.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for taking this deep dive with us.